Wilson Muri, Parliamentary Committee on Transport and Infrastructure Development, Elliot Chivige, Practitioner in Charge, Discovery Ambulance Services, and Ruvimbo Chanduru, Deputy Legal Advisor, Ministry of Transport and Infrastructural Development. We are discussing the topic, Road Accident Fund Bill, Step in the Right Direction. Lady and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me on The Chase today.
Pleasure, always.
Now, please note that all views expressed on The Chase are those of our guests and do not reflect the views of St. Papers 1980 or those of ZT and Prime. Let's cut straight to the chase. Now, the Road Accident Fund. What really is it? What is its purpose? And how important is it in the transportation industry? Rimbo, I'll start with you.
Okay, thank you, Faith. So perhaps before I go into what the Road Accident Fund exactly is, let me just offer a bit of context into where it fits into the road traffic management system. So at the moment, or currently, the framework that we have that deals with the road traffic management focuses more on preventive measures in the form of legislation such as the Road Motor Transportation Act, which deals with the licensing of operators. And then we have the Vehicle Licensing and Registration Act, which deals with the licensing of drivers, and the Road Traffic Act. So with regards to those pieces of legislation, the focus is more on preventive measures. Preventive measures in the sense that it's meant to ensure safety and security on our country's roads. Now, where the Road Accident Fund comes in, it comes in as a post-crash management system. It deals with incidences or consequences of road accidents after they have occurred. So that would be your medical treatment on site, emergency evacuation from the site, and medical treatment on arrival at the hospital, as well as funeral expenses only limited to burial and cremation, as it were.
Now we've established what the fund is, but who is funding that fund?
So in relation to funding models, as you may be aware, what was currently approved by Cabinet are the principles. Principles being guidelines that will inform the drafting of the legislation that is to come into effect. So in terms of the funding models, the list is non-exhaustive and it is a consultative process. We all know that the lawmaking process is largely consultative and it's a continuous process. So various avenues are being looked at. We did benchmark with other jurisdictions where their sources of funding would be derived from fuel levies. Other options would be sources of funding being derived from third-party insurance. But the list is not exhaustive, and the consultative process will give government an opportunity to be innovative with regards to identifying possible sources of funding for the fund.
Now, Honorable, we just want to zone in on what Rimbo just said, the issue of maybe the fund being financed from third-party insurance covers. What does this mean to the motor vehicle owner if, let's say, we decide that we are going to get the money from insurance? Obviously, insurance companies need their own share. You want now a share of that money. That does mean an increase of the money that is going to be paid. What does that mean?
Yeah, thank you so much, Faith. I think that's a very important question there. Like has been said by the previous speaker, we are still looking at other jurisdictions to lay making up from. But in terms of premium, currently people are paying premiums, insurance premiums, through various companies of insurance. So now if people are to pay an extra amount on top of what they are paying right now, obviously it will be a burden to the already burdened citizens. So I want to believe that the people of Zimbabwe will look at various options which might actually result in that existing third-party insurance being shared in a certain manner which can be favorable to all parties. As you may be aware, currently the third-party insurance is not being used by the insurance companies alone. There are quite various players in the amount that is being collected. So I want to believe that that's the trust that this bill might actually trigger for us to do.
Now, while we're still focusing on third-party insurance, both Zimbabwe's current third-party insurance system and the passenger liability insurance are very mandatory, and motorists have to have them. But then they have been criticized really for offering limited compensation, delayed payouts, and rarely covering emergency evacuation or emergency bills that need to be paid on the spot so a person can get the medical attention that they need. As emergency responders and as transporters, have you heard about the Road Accident Fund bill? And what are your thoughts or your expectations from this bill?
Thank you so much, Faith, for that question. My name is Elio Chivigi. I'm a paramedic by profession. I've been in the industry for the past 15 years. We have been advocating for this bill. We have been envying. We wanted to copy from our other countries, our neighbors, South Africa. They have an MVA, Motor Vehicle Accident Fund, Botswana, Namibia. Lack of funding was hindering emergency medical services in Zimbabwe. We talk about the platinum 10 minutes, which is the first 10 minutes post a motor vehicle crash. If anyone involved in an accident doesn't receive emergency medical services, doesn't receive bleeding control, airway management, the crucial aspects of life, the chances of survival diminish by almost 20%. So during that phase, we have been responding, in particular Discovered Ambulance Services. Since our inception in 2024, as emergency medical responders, we are mandated to respond, stabilize, and convey to an appropriate facility. We have been doing that, but the financial burden associated with it, because we've been knocking at all the doors. We would go to insurance companies, we would go to the accident victims, their families, their friends, their relatives, well wishers. We could not get any compensation after responding. So this is a very, very big development. We also have the golden hour, the first hour post a motor vehicle crash, which says if anyone does not receive definitive treatment, when I say definitive treatment, I mean someone within an hour of being involved in an accident, you should be in a theater, being operated, receiving surgical interventions. But that was none. So this is a very, very big development for Zimbabwe. It's a first for Zimbabwe.
Now, Bindstone, I'd want you to weigh in on that.
Yeah, sure. May I start by applauding what has just been done by our government to bring the accident fund, especially when focusing to our crews as drivers and conductors. They were found nowhere in terms of which, at a time when the accident happened, a driver and a conductor was not having care from the hospitals, because the passenger insurance covers the passengers only,
and not the drivers.
Crew.
Okay.
So we are very happy by the coming of this accident fund.
Now, remember, like you mentioned, the passengers insurance covers the passengers, motor vehicle insurance covers motorists. Who is and who is not included in the road accident fund? Remember, we have cyclists, we have pedestrians, all of which might get involved in an accident at one point or another.
Okay, so like I mentioned before, the priority of the road accident fund is post-crash management. And by post-crash management, he referred to the platinum, so I forgot the term, but the golden hour.
Platinum 10 minutes and the golden hour.
Platinum 10 minutes and the golden hour immediately after the accident. And if we look at that time period, the priority is medical treatment on site, evacuation from the scene, and medical treatment at health institutions. So if we look at an accident, say an accident occurs, anyone involved in that accident or anyone who's injured as a result of that accident, whether you are a passenger or whether you're a driver or whether you're a driver of another motor vehicle involved in that particular accident, you are covered under the road accident fund.
So it's inclusive of
It's-
everyone
it's
and
all
not
inclusive.
really divided to say it's for this person or for
Yes,
this person.
That's how holistic the intention is.
Now, many accidents, you would agree with me, or you might choose to disagree, but many accidents involve unroadworthy and sometimes very overloaded vehicles. And in some countries, the road accident fund does not cover people who are found to be responsible for the crash. Do you believe that the fund should then include clauses that penalize non-compliant transport operators, Langston?
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that, Faith, because in our country, we are trying by all means as transport operators and associations. We are complying with the government and we are taking all papers necessary, but we found most of the vehicles are going on with the mishkashkas. You find a Toyota Wish, a Ram passing through toll gates without anything from the police force that they should stop that vehicle to even to proceed by the passengers. Whenever those people who are ferried in those vehicles, if the accident happened, no one would then like to stand for those passengers to be treated.
So now, under the current legal provisions, all vehicles, motor vehicles here in Zimbabwe, are supposed to have third-party motor insurance. This is now a new fund, which means, like we did mention earlier, needs more money that maybe the motorists are putting in, or whichever way it is. How different is this model different from the existing models, Wilson?
Yeah, I think in my view, it's a very important question, because I think most of the people have been actually asking such questions to say that we already have third party and personal insurance. Why then the road accident fund? But the road accident fund has been alluded that it covers all road users. And now the funding models actually can come from the existing funding which we have. For example, the third party insurance can be a certain percentage which will be divided to cater for the road accident fund. We can also have another model where we can have fuel levy, we can have collections from the toll gates. So road accident fund and the third party insurance, they don't serve the same issue, really, because the road accident fund caters for the post-accident issue, where it can go beyond even funerals, catering for funerals, loss of income, and what have you. While the third party doesn't go beyond that. So there's really a significant difference in the two.
Now, Reverend Wilson, you are the legislators and you are from the ministry. So just help me understand. We are talking about a fuel levy, we're talking about insurance, we're talking about toll gates. But then there's an individual who does not own a motor vehicle, and their means of transportation is by public transportation. That means they do not care about a toll gate fee because they're in a public vehicle and they cater for that. They do not care about a fuel levy or buying fuel because they do not have a motor vehicle or third-party insurance. How really does this work now? If you say it's inclusive of everyone, does it mean only the motor vehicle users or owners are the ones carrying the burden of this road accident fund?
Okay, so before I perhaps go into that, I just wanted to point out a key distinction between the road accident fund model and the third-party insurance or the current insurance regime. The road accident fund model is intended to be a no-fault based system. By no-fault based system, what I mean is before any payout under the ordinary insurance or the current insurance regime, before any payout is made, negligence has to be established first. And that can be a time-years process. Time years to the disadvantage of that golden hour that we've spoken about, that we have lives at stake within that very critical hour. The road accident fund, being a no-faulty based system, is meant to address those issues without establishing negligence or fault first. So that then cuts down on the time that it takes to process such claims or to process such payouts, and it deals with the critical issue that we're trying to address of cutting down on casualties that result from road accidents.
And now for the other part of the question.
What was that?
Our motor vehicle users going to bear the brunt of paying for or putting in money into the road accident fund. alone?
Well, like I mentioned before, the funding model is still something that is under discussion. It's still something that is to be considered, and it's still something that has to be consulted on. If at all we are to say the motor vehicle drivers or motor vehicle owners should bear the brunt, then if it's to benefit the larger population, then I think it's one of those things that we have to, I suppose, accept. It's a necessary, I don't want to say necessary evil, but it's a necessary occurrence, that it's something that has to be there to be able to assist the larger population.
So motor vehicle users taking one for the team?
Yes.
Okay. So now every system is sometimes prone to abuse. That is a given, most times, and maybe sometimes fraudulent activities. And our research has shown that in countries like South Africa, there have been cases of medical aid fraud or legal practitioners that are inflating costs, when, like Elliot, he works for an ambulance service. They inflate the cost in order to get more money from the road accident fund. How then are you going to be able to deal with those kind of loopholes when it comes to fraudulent activities or activities that really seem off?
Okay, so in dealing with, I suppose, the likelihood of abuse, it's something that we have to look at holistically in the sense that there's more than one stakeholder involved. We have enforcement agencies. This is going to be an entity that is going to have a board. This is going to be an entity that is going to have management. It's an entity that is making use of public funds. So surely, like any other public entity, certain measures of accountability and transparency are going to apply. If I can give an example, let me take a shot in the dark and give an example of Zenara. Zenara is a public entity, but it's also subject to certain pieces of legislation like the Public Entities Corporate Governance Act, where they have to adhere to good corporate governance practices, which are aimed at curbing abuse and curbing corruption. So as the Road Accident Fund is going to be an entity that makes use of public funds, those measures, as they apply to other public entities, are going to apply to that road accident fund.
Also, I just want you to weigh in on this. What's your contribution in regards to that?
I would want also to concur with the previous speaker that we need also to safeguard abuse. Like you have mentioned, I think we saw abuse in Botswana as well. In Botswana, they've got what they call motor vehicle accident fund. In South Africa, they've got the same name, road accident fund, like the Zimbabwean proposed one. So abuse obviously is something which we need to look at closely. I want to believe that now that it involves public funds, the coming in of a board and the law of public entities, Corporate Governance Act, being also weighing in, as well as also the offices of ZAC and all that, I want to believe that we can manage it. It's not easy for me to speak on behalf of wrongdoers and especially with regard to money. But I want to believe that we can also benchmark from other jurisdictions and look at the loopholes and why they face such kind of challenges, and then we can then improve on our part.
Now, Elliot, in order for there to be some sort of control or stoppage of fraudulent activities, there might need to be tight monetary control when it comes to giving out money to the service providers. How then do you think we can strike a balance between timeless payments to you as a service provider and stopping fraudulent activities?
Okay, in Zimbabwe, we are lucky to already have AFOS. AFOS means Association of Healthcare Funders, and this is a fund, which means the fund should join AFOS or should also be a member of AFOS. AFOS already regulates how much is paid for what has been done. As an example, in the emergency services, we have got 3 different clusters or types of calls. We have a primary call where someone is under a bridge, someone under a bus, someone in the street on the roadside who has not received any treatment, who has not been seen by any medical profession. It's called a primary call. We also have now someone who is now in a hospital and they want to go for a certain or a particular procedure at a certain service provider and come back to their hospital. That is called a procedure call. Then we have a transfer, an inter-facility transfer. Their price is already benchmarked for those clusters. So that can be used, in terms of fraud and other things to avoid overclaims and other things. I think that can be an instrument that can be used.
Now, remember, you have mentioned we were talking about who gets covered and how do they get covered. But just then clear it up for us before we move on to the next question. How do you assess who is eligible for rehabilitation, who is eligible for compensation from this fund?
Anyone, like I mentioned before, who is a direct or who is directly affected as a result of a road accident fund should receive cover.
And if the person directly involved unfortunately passes away, do the families benefit?
The fund, in relation to death, the fund will only go as far as funeral expenses for that casualty. So funeral expenses relating to the burial or cremation if the case is a cremation case.
Now, also from what has been drafted so far, have you seen that what the criteria that are going to be used, if the processes are going to be standardized, if we're going to use a one size fits all approach to who gets what in this accident fund?
Faith, I think at this point in time, we only have a cabinet note in terms of approval of the bill or the road accident fund bill in cabinet. We don't have any draft as yet. But as Parliament, we've been ready to be involved in terms of making sure that this bill sees light of day. So, but in terms of like the previous speaker has mentioned, is something which we would need to look at it holistically. I think the various engagement that we are going to do, because as you know, when a bill comes out and goes out to the public, we are going to be listening to the people. Our government is a listening government, so we would need to hear more from the road users out there. So we don't have any draft as yet.
Now, Banton, I want to take it now to the current insurance model that we do have. Do you think the compensation is fair? Do you think the way that they handle compensation in regards to accidents when they do happen is fair? Is it quick, or is it a very tiresome and tedious process for you guys as transporters?
It is very tiresome. It's not quick. Because we have to wait for 2 to 3 months without being attended. Because most of the insurance, they say third party is just something like a thing we use to collect money, and we don't have the time to make your vehicle compensated.
Now, you will forgive me for going back to some of the responses that you have given me before. Elliot, you have mentioned about the golden hour. You've talked about how important it is for someone to get medical attention within the first 10 minutes or first hour when an accident does occur. But most times, we have noticed that the reason why service providers hesitate to give treatment is because they want money up front. They want to get their payments first before they can render services to the victims of an accident. And now the golden hour passes before a family can, get the money or source the money to pay for that. Do you think this fund is going to give you the confidence to do your job without having to wait for payments, knowing fully well that you are going to be paid either way?
Thank you so much for that question, Faith. This fund in Meadow is going to give peace of mind to healthcare providers. As you've already alluded, ambulance services were hesitant. Medical doctors were hesitant to attend to motor vehicle accident victims. But now with the availability of such a funding model, I'm telling you, as Discovered Ambulance, we already had a plan. The plan was to divide the city into 10-kilometer radius clusters, the country into 50-kilometer radius clusters. And in each cluster, we make sure we have an ambulance that is there. The other plan, we have already approached the Ministry of Transport, we have approached the Zinara, we have approached other organizations, Traffic Safety Council of Zimbabwe. We have already partnered them and collaborated with them. So as Discovered Ambulances, we station whenever Traffic Safety Council of Zimbabwe are rolling out their roadside campaigns. We have partnered them. We also park our ambulances there, helping them dishing out preventive measures, health education. So such a funding model is like I would tell you, Faith, that primary health in a functional health system has got 3 important pillars. The first pillar is preventive. We want to prevent that accident happening by all means possible. This is where Traffic Safety Council of Zimbabwe comes in. Then we have the curative, which is the post-crash period. It has already happened. What do we do now? We want to salvage. Someone has lost a life. Someone has already lost a limb. So there's morbidity and comorbidity, mortality involved. What do we do? We also want the fund to play a critical role there. Then someone has been hospitalized and has been treated, has been in theater, but now they no longer have a limb. What do they now need? Which is the third pillar, which is the rehabilitative. We want someone to go to a rehabilitative facility where they're going to be rehabilitated and integrated back into society in a state which is close or almost to what they were before this incident occurred. So that's a holistic approach that we are expecting this funding model to provide for Zimbabwe.
Now, Bryanston, in cases where your transporters have gotten into an accident and the passengers there do not really have the funds to get the treatment that they need, how have you been navigating that challenge?
Most of the time, the victims, the relatives, they ought to call the owner directly. Then the owner will get in to fund the victim.
Mm-hmm. Does that not mean more burden on you as the transporter? Or do you eventually say, you know what, time has passed, I'm sure the victim is now okay, pay back the money?
Yeah, it's more burden to us.
And do they have to pay back when you help them out, or it's now an obligation to you as a transporter?
In some time they pay back if you have to follow the procedures from what the IC said a demand on. Because what really makes most of the operators fail to meet the what is being wanted by the IC said, they don't meet the target, whereby there is need for police report, there is need for compliance. So once an accident happened to a vehicle which is have defection, nobody will stand with the operator.
And they cannot claim the insurance
They cannot
money.
claim back.
Okay, so now we talked earlier about potential fraud that might happen. Now let's talk about a situation where potentially money runs out and there's a deficit, the claims keep piling, and there's no longer a way to fund this road accident fund. Is that a possibility you're looking into, and how are you trying to stop that? How are you going to try and navigate and move away from it before it even happens? Do you have a plan in place for that?
Thank you, Faith. Like I mentioned before, the funding model is not exhaustive. So our reliance on one source is something that we're trying to avoid. That's why we are trying to be innovative in looking at other possible sources. What our priority right now is to get the fund up and running. So obviously the immediate sources of fund are going to go towards that. But in the long term, obviously we're going to look at other sources of funding or other funding models that will keep it in perpetuity so that it doesn't die out like we've seen in other jurisdictions.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Your take?
Yeah, it's quite a challenging one, that one, yes. I think we surely have to put some measures in place for this fund to succeed, especially with regard to abuse. We have seen it in other jurisdictions where people they get overcompensated. People bring in their medical reports, as you have been, my sister has shared, that is no fault based. So it means every road user is able to, it's possible for them to claim on that fund. So obviously there's need for us to look at monitoring measures more in terms of how best can we monitor the funds that we have. Some of the issues that we could also maybe look at, I want to agree that the sources of funds should also be broad. We need to look at various funding models, because obviously, like you've said in your opening remarks, that we are actually seeing a lot of people dying in our roads. 97% being human error. The minister actually mentioned it in Parliament. So monitoring measures needs us to really look at them, which I want to believe that is going to be one of the issues that will be engaging. As I've mentioned, that this bill is still at its infant stage. We are yet to go out there and hear views from all citizens of Zimbabwe.
So now I just want to really understand something. It's a no-fault based fund, which means it doesn't matter whether you were wrong or not. You just need to get medical attention when you need to get it. Does this not then promote some complacency amongst our motorists, knowing for a fact that even if I'm wrong, even if I cause an accident, I'm just going to get treated either way?
Okay, so at the beginning of the show, I did make a distinction between what we would term preventive measures. And it is within those preventive measures that we would intend to deal with unruly motorists or those who would break the law and cause these accidents. So in the the road accident fund is just meant to address what occurs after an accident would have, what happens after an accident would have occurred. Despite there being preventive measures, or notwithstanding there being preventive measures, it strictly deals with what happens after. A framework to deal with those who break the law, those who cause these accidents, is in place. Of course, maybe it would need to be tightened here and there, and as the Ministry of Transport, we are currently doing a legislative framework review of those pieces of legislation that I mentioned before to deal with licensing of drivers, to strengthen those institutions that license drivers, to strengthen those institutions that enforce motorists on the road, to be able to strengthen the preventive measures that are in place.
Now, this is something that is still being crafted. This is still in the works.
Yes.
And you are sitting here with me, gentlemen. The ladies excused for this one. You are sitting with me here. What do you want to see being included in this bill from your perspective as an emergency service provider, from your perspective and from your perspective as well? What would you like to see in there that would make sense and make your jobs much easier and that would help the general populace of Zimbabwe? I'll start with you, Wilson.
Thank you so much. I think from the bill, like has been mentioned, that we already have measures. I think it's very important for people to understand that we can't have measures for people who cause accidents. Reckless drivers, people who have got cars which are not complying, lack of compliance and all those issues. They are already there in the legislation. So now in the post-accident management system, that's where the road accident fund comes in. So I'm looking at issues to, the bill should look closely to issues of monitoring abuse. We need to find a way to say, how then do we make this fund work without it being abused? I think that is one of the issues that we are going to be pushing for as legislators and members of the portfolio committee. We need to look at other jurisdictions, what went wrong, what has happened in those jurisdictions to create this problem of abuse of funds. So in my view, I think I am looking forward to a bill and an act when it was already, when eventually it's enacted, which will be actually having measures of catering for safeguarding abuse of funds.
Now, allow me to put you right on the spot. You say you want to push to make sure that the abuse is stopped from happening. Yeah. We did talk about maybe, making sure there's a board that is in place in order to do that. Do you still stand by those same sentiments, or there's another method or preventative method specifically looking at?
I would want to appreciate the efforts of the current government led by His Excellency Dr. Idi Mnangagwa, that we already have measures in terms of corruption, dealing with how public funds are supposed to be utilized. We enacted a law in 2018, the Public Entities Corporate Governance Act, which is going to be dealing with various boards or committees which will be appointed to cater for this fund. So for me, I want to believe that with those boards already in place, and we've learned a lot from issues of public fund management, I would want to believe that we should give the Road Accident Fund a chance and still put it in the same framework which you currently have.
Winston, your take? What do you want to see as transporters in that bill?
As transporters in our sector, as well as we need this fund to roll over Zimbabwe, we appeal to the government that they must stop those rogue elements from our side as operators, as well as the rogue passengers who seem to to board their vehicles on Mushikashika. Where there are no ranks, vehicles, we have defections. As I said earlier on, you see our enforcers, be it council or ZRP, they leave those vehicles passing through roadblocks and toll gates. When we actually see by your eyes, you can see that that vehicle cannot reach the destination. So we are saying to the government, we don't just want to pump this money as accident fund to anyone who just create his own accident. Like as of now, we are excited and we are celebrating about the Trababras, the flyover. We are seeing there are people drinking beer in a wish. They are chanting and accelerating and saying, yeah. All those things. Once someone gets in an accident, he just rush to get that money for free.
It's something that Rimbo said, it is something that they're looking at and saying, we were not going to give money to just anyone willingly. Do you actually think it might also be a way to cut down on the illegal mshikashikas if they do realize that, if you cannot cash in from this fund, I'm not going to board mshikashika, and eventually, we're just looking at a broader picture here. What's your take?
Yeah, I would want to agree with you, Faith, that the lack of compliance might actually be also resolved by the introduction of the Road Accident Fund, because obviously, but now another issue that I foresee having challenges, as you are aware that this bill is not yet out there as an act. I think we need to also to relook at the no fault-based element. So that we can then, because obviously it's a good thing that it will not delay, it will cater for the golden hour, of course, but it will also need us to balance with abuse in terms of everyone knowing that I will get compensated, so no one would take care of how they drive on the roads.
Remember the no fault based clause. Receiving the
we need to look at it, Faith, honestly. Obviously I can't preempt what the engagements or the stakeholder engagements will come out with. But I also think that we need to relook at that and see a model which will work for Zimbabwe.
But remember, if we have to relook at that clause, does this not now bring us back to the third-party insurance issue that we are currently dealing with, where the insurance has to first look at who caused the accident, what caused it, before a payout is done? And is that not what we are trying to avoid by this fund?
I'm inclined to agree with that last statement. Reason being, the priority of the Road Accident Fund is to cater for immediate treatment or immediate consequences of the accident. Now, if we're going to have situations where we'd have to determine fault first, like Mr. Winston mentioned before, it could take up to 3 months. The person would have long gone. And this is something we're trying to curb. Of course, there are certain parameters of negligence that will then determine how much of a claim is to be paid out. But then if we're to look at the immediate consequences of the accident, no fault should be a priority.
Now, you are an emergency provider yourself. What do you want to see added or even modified in the bill that is to be enacted?
As Discover Ambulance Services, we are already on the path. We have the Presidential Emergency Medical Scheme, which is already rolling out first aid trainings to communities in the country. We have been to all the 10 provinces of the country. So definitely what we would want is a holistic approach. Like I said earlier on, we want the 3 pillars to be covered by the fund, which is preventive, curative, and the rehabilitational. And what do we also want? We want to have ambulances in those clusters that I mentioned, to have an ambulance in every 10-kilometer radius of an urban setting, to have an ambulance in 50-kilometer setting of a rural setting, to have an ambulance at every toll gate, to have an ambulance at every hotspot. Hotspot is a place where there's a likelihood of an accident happening from statistics or from the nature of the road, to have an ambulance there. So what does an ambulance do? An ambulance sits there where there's an accident or no accident. There are workers that need to be paid. There are sundries that need to be bought. There are drugs that are expiring. So you want a funding model that is holistic, that look at all those things. Who is parking where and for how long, and how should they be compensated, so that the whole country is covered with ambulances. Currently, from statistics, Zimbabwe is about 200 ambulances only, and most of them are in urban areas, and most of them that are thriving are private owned. But according to UN, Zimbabwe needs 800 to 1,000 ambulances to cover the whole countries, so that we have ambulances in all those risky areas, so that we cover that platinum 10 minutes, whereby we want someone to have received first aid, emergency medical services within 10 minutes. The brain only has 4 to 6 minutes to survive in case of an accident, in case of cut off supply of blood. So if you don't get there in 10 minutes, it means whatever you're doing, you are now salvaging. We also talked about the golden hour, where someone should be in a theater within an hour. So we want the model to look into all those clusters, and also partner companies that are already willing, like Discovered Ambulance Services. We are already on the way. We're just waiting for a funding model to help us go forward.
But Elliot, just clear something up for me. Is it going to be the road accident fund that makes sure that Discovery Ambulance Service workers in this case are paid, or is that your mandate as Discovery Ambulances?
That's our mandate. But like I said earlier on, the burden was, as an emergency provider, if there's an accident, you are mandated. We've signed an oath to say I will respond. So when you respond, compensation was scant. There was no one to compensate. So when we welcome such funding models, it's now within our structures. When we receive the funding, what we do it, who we pay it, we don't pay it. That's where we come. That's where I'm coming from.
Okay, Rumba, would the fund cover that aspect?
The fund, I think I would say the larger or long-term intention is to be able to capacitate those directly involved in dealing with immediate treatment after a road accident. So it's something that is under discussion. It's something that can be considered and looked into.
So making sure that the emergency service providers are catered
available
for, and the passengers and accident victims are catered for as well.
Precisely.
Now I'm bringing it back now to the Committee on Transport and Infrastructure Development. Some very shocking statistics that we just heard: 200 out of 800 possible ambulances. Is that not a concern, and how can you navigate that?
I think it's a concern. I'm happy that we now have a Discovery Ambulance, and they are doing quite very well, given that they started, I think it's last year, if I'm not mistaken. The government is actually now partnering with emergency service providers. I think we've seen our president has been actually spearheading government involvement in rescuing people, especially on emergency issues. I want to believe that because the president has already initiated under the presidential emergency medical scheme, it's a welcome development that the government has already started. I want to believe that obviously we can't do everything at once. We go step at a time. I want to believe that the UN statistics of 800 which are missing, the government should be now looking at that and see how best we can work around it.
Why the deficit? Why do you think we have the deficit to start with?
I think the major challenge that we've been having is we've been depending more on the private sector in terms of emergency services. And I think another issue is what my colleague has alluded to, that it has been issues of compensation. Who was going to be paying for the person who needs emergency services? Our model in Zimbabwe doesn't have a fund which caters for people who were involved in accidents. That's why it's a welcome development that we've got the Road Accident Fund. So the coming in of a Road Accident Fund will obviously bring in the need for more ambulances, as these ambulance owners will now get compensation in time, and they are guaranteed of compensation. Yeah.
Hopefully it does work out like that, and there are no issues of loopholes and over claiming and whatnot that might come with the bill. Well, we have come to the end of our show, The Chase, tonight. I would like to thank my guests, Bindstone Kasande, ZUDAC Chairperson, Honorable Wilson Muri, Parliamentary Committee on Transport and Infrastructural Development, Elliot Chivige, Practitioner in Discovery Ambulance Services, and Ruvimbo Chanduru, Deputy Legal Advisor, Ministry of Transport and Infrastructural Development. Gentlemen and lady, thank you so much for joining me on The Chase tonight.
Thank you
so much, Faith.
And to our audience, thank you so much for tuning in. I have been your host, Faith Nyoda. Good evening and enjoy the rest of your viewing.
ZTN Prime subscribes to regulations governing broadcasting services in Zimbabwe. All programming is produced and aired within the framework